All 198 free agents this NBA offseason. This is a video for the basketball sickos of the world. So if you think you're a basketball sicko, if you eat, sleep, and breathe hoops and love the NBA as much as I do, comment basketball sicko down below. Thank you all so much for tuning in here to another video here at Utility Sports. This one, of course, a deep dive into NBA free agency, which is just less than 2 weeks away now at this point. We're getting closer and closer to a mega offseason where there's going to be crazy movement, trades, of course, an incredible draft class this year, and free agency, which will be another shifting point in the NBA this offseason. Hopefully you guys do enjoy the content today. If you do, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And let's jump forward into that video preview. In today's video, we're going to, of course, talk about all 198 NBA free agents. And that comes with a litany and a wide array of contract types. We're going to look at guys who have player options. Will they opt in? Will they opt out? What are the possibilities there? We're going to look at team options. A lot of them are cheaper team options, which we'll discuss. But then there's also some big numbers in there. Cough, cough, Fred VanVleet of the Houston Rockets. So Rockets fans, stay tuned for that. We're going to look at restricted free agents. Of course, you get a lot of two-way guys in there. So if you really are a basketball sicko, you're going to stick around to the end for that one because, oh my goodness, there's a lot of two-way contracts we're going to talk about in today's video. We'll also look at some max contract players. Are there any out in free agency this offseason? We'll look at some of the big contract guys, players who I think will get more than that mid-level exception number. Then we will look at that mid-level exception. Of course, there's two different mid-level numbers. You have the taxpayer mid-level exception for teams that are into the tax. And then you also have the non-tax mid-level exception, which is pretty sizable this year, over $14.1 million. That's a pretty good contract to go around, and there's quite a few candidates to at least receive partial amounts of that. We also have biannual exception players we'll discuss, which is a cheaper contract, but still a very useful one to get a player on a deal bigger than the minimum. And then we'll, of course, look at minimum contract guys as well as unrestricted free agents in comparison to some of those restricted free agents that we will also discuss. So I think the best place to start here is with the player options. You're going to see a few of these guys on the thumbnail in today's video, and we're going to look at the stars first. LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden. These are three of the big discourse names in this year's free agency. Now, the reports currently are indicating that LeBron James will likely opt into his max number there at $52.6 million. That's a hefty price. It really, really is. And I understand, especially for some of the people that say, well, he should opt out and sign on the minimum and give the Lakers a chance to load up their team, load their roster around Luka Doncic and try and win another title or two before he retires. Well, I totally understand the kind of thought process behind that. I do think it would set a very bad precedent in the NBA in terms of stacking your roster, relying on sponsorships and ad deals, brand deals instead of NBA contract money. And LeBron throughout his entire career has been deserving of the max contract, even though there has been, I think, slippage in his overall impact over the last 2 years. He is still a max level player and deserves to be paid as such. So I understand the thought behind it, but I just cannot see LeBron opting out of that money. $52 million is still a lot of money, even for LeBron James in the year 2025. I mean, that's generational wealth in 1 year. He's going to be able to stack that away, help Bronny out on his rookie contract there too. So LeBron definitely still worth that money, and I don't think he'll be passing it up. Kyrie Irving, I think his contract is really tricky this offseason for the Mavericks, and a few reasons why. First of all, the Mavericks are dangerously close to the first apron. They have, of course, a very significant cap hold with the first overall pick. How much they're going to pay Cooper Flagg, of course, is, a bigger number. You're looking at an 8-figure per year contract for a rookie. And with that in mind, the Mavericks weren't necessarily expecting to have that. They have Caleb Martin's contract that they could maybe look to salary dump, Najee Marshall's money, Klay Thompson's money. The Mavericks do have some movable deals, of course, to try and open up some space. But one of the best ways for them to actually do that might be to have Kyrie Irving opt out of his contract and then extend on a longer-term deal with a slightly lower annual average value. His player option is for $43 million, but coming off of an ACL injury for a guard, into his 30s, it might make sense for Kyrie to get some long-term financial security in this kind of deal as well. So you maybe are looking at a 4-year 135, 4-year 140, where you're looking at a $35 million per year contract over the next 4 years, where yes, Kyrie Irving is losing a little bit of short-term money, going down from that $43 million mark down to 35. It's just an idea. I'm not, again, suggesting that I know that will happen, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have, because I do think giving Kyrie Irving a little bit more long-term stability, it seems like he really likes being in Dallas. Of course, there was a lot of turmoil this past year with the Luka Doncic trade, but I think all things considered, with the way the Mavs lucked out, got the first pick, still have AD, Kyrie to build around, with Cooper Flag now obviously being the long-term direction of the organization. Getting Kyrie Irving locked down long-term, I think, would be in the best interest of Dallas. They could get a little bit of cap relief this year if they do it in a clever manner, like I mentioned. And then James Harden took kind of a little bit of a discount for the Clippers on his current number, looking at just $36.3 million player option. He's worth a lot more than that, made All-NBA third team this past year, I thought very deservingly, had a tremendous year for the Clippers, and really carried their offense for long stretches when Kawhi Leonard was out. I just thought, every time Harden came off the floor, the Clippers offense would just evaporate. And then when he was back on the floor, they just had a real solid identity going to Harden, Zubac's pick and roll, being able to facilitate off-ball action for Norman Powell. I just felt like Harden was a real orchestrator and maestro there for them this year. There's a reason he called himself the system. I firmly believe that. I think the best thing for Harden here would be to also opt out and get a contract a little bit closer to $40 million annually on a 2 or 3 year basis. So you're looking 2 years 80, 3 years 120. That's kind of what I think Harden is worth at this point in time, especially for the Clippers with the season he just had. Now, could I see him opting in and ultimately the Clippers trying to preserve their long-term flexibility for, say, the 2027 offseason? Definitely a real possibility. Maybe Harden goes with a 1+1 again. Opts out of this one, maybe goes 2 for 80, but it's a 1+1 with either a team option or just flat out another player option. Definitely would be interesting to see, but I think the biggest takeaway here for me with these three players, they're going to be staying with their home teams right now. LeBron will stay in LA, Kyrie will stay in Dallas, and Harden will stay with the Clippers there in that brand new Intuit Dome. Now we move on to some of the other player options, and there's 16 here on this graphic. And these ones, some of them are very cut and dry, some of them are very difficult. We're going to fly through some of the cut and dry ones. Chris Middleton, at this point of his career, he's going to opt in. $34 million, that's a lot of money for Chris Middleton. There's no way he's turning that down. John Collins had a really great season for himself this past year for Utah, but to be completely honest, the market out in free agency would not be $26+ million for him. He will opt into that contract. Dorian Finney-Smith, $15.4 million. Thought had a pretty solid season last year. Really started the season off great for Brooklyn. Of course, got traded to LA around Christmas time last year. And I do think with DFS in general, that $15.4 million mark is one he would not beat in free agency. It's higher than the mid-level exception this year. I definitely think he's going to opt into that contract. Naz Reid, that's a clear no-brainer. No, he is not opting into that contract. He will sign a big contract this offseason, one that is greater than the mid-level exception. You're looking at a $20 to $25 million a year player, 4 years 80, 5 years 100 maybe if he stays in Minnesota, something along those lines where you're looking at $20 million being the kind of bare minimum what you should expect for Naz Reid this offseason. And the likelihood of him getting a 4-year, $100 million deal, maybe even 4 for 110, right? Where you start seeing that $27.5 million annual average value. I think that's very reasonable as an expectation this offseason, whether it's with Minnesota, San Antonio, maybe in a sign and trade, maybe a team with cap space like Brooklyn. Definitely some options out there for Naz, but he's going to get paid, capital P-A-I-D, paid this offseason. Bobby Portis, $13.4 million player option. He will opt into that. Matisse Thybulle, $11.6 million. Very easily will opt into it. Has been dealing with a ton of injuries the last few years. There's just no way Matisse does not opt into that contract. Pat Connaughton, really started getting a lot of DMPCDs this past year for Milwaukee under Doc Rivers. He will no doubt opt into that contract. Now, the question is, will Milwaukee keep him? I could see him getting salary dumped or just flat out included into a trade somewhere. That $9.4 million expiring salary is quite movable, I would imagine. And I think Connaughton will get moved, whether it's at this offseason mark or at the trade deadline this next year. But what I do know for sure, he will be picking up this player option. Jevon Carter, another real obvious one, $6.8 million. He will pick that one up. Notice some of these contracts out here in the market. Pat Connaughton, Jevon Carter, Matisse, these are all getting picked up. These are, big contracts for the caliber of player that these guys are. Dario Saric was one of the big mistakes last offseason. I was shocked when he got more than the minimum. I just didn't understand why Calvin Booth did that. Now, Calvin Booth is no longer the GM of the Denver Nuggets, but Denver stuck with Dario Saric for now. We'll see if they can get out of his salary via trade. It does become an expiring, so it's definitely movable, I would have to imagine. But $5.4 million will be on their books, at least at the beginning of this offseason. We'll see if they're able to get off of him rather quickly. Andre Drummond will definitely opt into that $5 million deal. I thought it was a pretty solid contract. I do think he returned some okay value at that number, but I don't think he'll beat that in free agency this offseason, so I do think he'll opt in. Nick Batum loves the Clippers. He loves being in LA. He will opt into that $4.9 million number, no questions asked. Eric Gordon, he'll opt into $3.5 million. I just think for him at his age, I'm not sure if he would get another NBA contract, so he will opt in. Kevin Porter Jr., there's already been reports and rumors that he will opt out of that. While I don't really think that's a genius idea for him, I understand it because he was on the minimum. The minimum with the new salary cap jump is actually going to be higher than $2.5 million, so that's the reason why. My question, though, is which teams are really going after him? He was a real negative player in the playoffs. I thought he was not a real positive player throughout the course of the regular season. But Milwaukee, which is why I think opting in is smart here, with Damian Lillard out, that's really one of the few teams that I could see giving him significant minutes and significant opportunity to extend his career this season, which is why, for me, I wouldn't even risk it if I was Kevin Porter Jr. I would just opt in, but I do think he will opt out. We'll see if he sticks in Milwaukee or not. Dwight Powell, I think, is a really interesting one. $4 million. I talked about the Mavericks with Kyrie Irving looking for some long-term flexibility. The Mavericks, there's a few ways they could go about this. If they want to save money, they could, if Dwight Powell opts in, stretch and waive him and cut off that number throughout 4 or 5 years. Or I think another creative thing that they could do is give him a multi-year minimum contract deal. If they get him to opt out, they say, hey, Dwight Powell, please opt out. We'll give you a 3-year deal worth $7.5 million. You're cutting his annual average value down from 4 down to 2.5. And again, it's just a minimum player, so you can have that throughout the course of the next few years. Now, one of the tricky things, if you do give out a multiple year contract on a minimum, instead of the league office paying that salary, your team, your organization is actually the one who has to pay it. So even though the cap hit situation is the same, which is why Dallas would maybe do this, it does mean more money coming out of your owner's pocket. But given the fact that Powell has a $4 million player option, I think the Mavericks could still be really motivated to do that. And Dwight Powell could look at it as a way to extend his NBA career and make a little bit money, extra money over time, making in total $7.5 million compared to the $4 million he's due next season. Kelly Oubre for the Sixers, I think this is, again, a really interesting number in this player option landscape here. $8.4 million. I do feel like Kelly Oubre can maybe beat that out in free agency. I'm just not confident that he would, though. And I think that's one of the tricky things. I think the safe option for him is to just opt in, even if you are sacrificing $1 or $2 million. At this point, $8.4 million is still a pretty good number for him to play on and make. I don't think opting in is a bad idea, but I could see him opting out. I think he's really one of those guys who's on the ledger either way for how this could go. Comment down below what you think will happen with Kelly Oubre Jr. And then the biggest one, the most fascinating one of all of them, is Julius Randle of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, recently, specifically Chris Finch, the head coach of the Minnesota Timberwolves, talked with Paul Allen, a real voice in Minnesota. Of course, a lot of Vikings fans, Timberwolves fans will know him quite well. Chris Finch was speaking with PA and said that Julius Randle will be on the team next season. So the indicators right now are pointing toward Randle being, I think, a core identity piece for Minnesota moving forward. Of course, had a pretty strong season for himself. Some really great playoff moments and some really bad ones against the Oklahoma City Thunder, but some really great ones against the Lakers and the Warriors. So Randle, $31 million player option. That's a lot of money. Could I see him maybe signing with Minnesota a little bit cheaper, but on a 3-year, 4-year deal? You're looking at maybe something like 3 years, 80. That's about $27 million annually. Could he help the Wolves out like that, saving them about $4 million this upcoming season, helping squeeze in Naz Reid's contract, as they're very likely going to lose Nickeil Alexander-Walker this offseason? Now, as we move into some of the team options, I think there is a plethora of interesting ones to talk about. We have 31 total, and the biggest one to talk about first is Fred VanVleet. $44.9 million team option. Now, of course, the Rockets and VanVleet's camp very wisely agreed to push that team option date back. It was supposed to be either accepted or declined by the Rockets 5 days after their season ended after losing in the first round. Both parties agreed to push it back to the standard date when most of these options occur, which is just a couple days before free agency. And I think that decision was smart for VanVleet because otherwise it would have inherently been declined probably from Houston. And what it does is it gives the Rockets, which I think is why it's smart for them as well, a lot of trade flexibility. Now they go through the draft portion with this $45 million contract hypothetically on their books that they could trade. They could include it into a Kevin Durant deal potentially. Now, I'm not saying that they will, but it gives them a lot more flexibility to attach this contract into a deal, gives them basically this huge, massive expiring salary if they want to trade him. And of course, they have pick 10 to work with. They have assets to throw into VanVleet's contract to make something work with another team around the league. Like Kevin Durant, if you do something like VanVleet, Cam Whitmore, pick 10, for Durant, that's a really, really strong offer in my opinion, and one that would probably get Durant to Houston if you really want him without jeopardizing too much of your long-term roster. I don't think that this option will be picked up at all unless Fred VanVleet's traded. The most likely outcome, though, if he's not traded, is that he will have this option declined and that they will negotiate a 2-year $60, maybe 2-year $50 million contract, somewhere in that $25 to $30 million annual range, kind of like what we just talked about with Julius Randle and Minnesota. Mo Wagner, $11 million team option. I do think Orlando will look to keep Mo Wagner, of course. The Magic had to already make some decisions on some of their other pieces, specifically Gary Harris and Corey Joseph after the Desmond Bane trade because of some of the league stipulations and rules with the timing of that trade, which is, I think, a very fascinating little nugget. But Mo Wagner here specifically for Orlando, the fact that they, of course, did not decline this team option shows that they're at least still considering keeping it. $11 million, I think, is a relatively fair price for Mo Wagner, maybe a little higher. I could see them kind of nixing this deal, declining the option, but then doing something like 2-year $16, especially since Mo's coming off of an injury where he missed a lot of time this year. 2-year $16, 2-year $17 million, somewhere in that kind of range with maybe another team option or even a player option on it, something that would incentivize Mo to sign a deal like that. Vasi Micic, this $8.1 million team option will definitely be declined. There's no way that Phoenix is going to keep him. He will probably return back to Europe this offseason after his NBA career really did not last too long. Aaron Holiday, $4.9 million team option. I do think Houston will pick this option up. Gives them some reliability in the backcourt, someone who can be a ball handler for them throughout the course of an 82-game regular season. Of course, I don't think he's central to their long-term plans, but I do think in the short term, having a $5 million expiring contract is not a bad thing to have on your books. Gives you a little bit of flexibility. And the Rockets, I don't think, are too overly concerned about their cap table this upcoming season. AJ Mitchell, Ariel Hukporti, Justin Edwards, Keon Johnson, Luka Garza, Caleb Houston, all of those team options will be picked up. As soon as you get to team options that are this small, in a lot of cases even smaller than the minimum contracts for veteran players, you're going to see teams pick them up. Of course, AJ Mitchell's a no-brainer. Hukporti's a no-brainer for New York. Justin Edwards is a no-brainer for Philadelphia here. Was one of the few bright spots for the Sixers this past season when he was actually on the court. Keon Johnson, I think, is a no-brainer here for Brooklyn. I think one of the questionable things for them, though, is if they do want to operate with $90 million of cap space, they would have to almost renounce everybody and, cut some of their team options loose as well. So that would be Keon Johnson in the event that they do go that way. He's like kind of the one guy I'm not sure. I think with the rumors around Minnesota right now, potentially trading Gobert, I think Luka Garza will definitely be staying, especially on that cheap of a contract. And then Caleb Houston just will most definitely be staying in Orlando because they're looking for cheap depth on their roster now after acquiring Desmond Bane's $40 million salary. Houston will be staying there in Orlando. Continuing on with more team options, you look at Jalen Williams of the Oklahoma City Thunder. That one will be definitely accepted again, very cheap. Lonnie Walker, the fourth of Philadelphia. I do think very likely that team option is accepted. The Sixers don't have a lot of cap flexibility given the significant size of the contracts of Paul George and Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. Now we'll see what happens with PG's contract by the time of the draft. But Lonnie Walker, the fourth, will be staying in Philadelphia. PJ Tucker, $3.5 million. I think that option will be declined. It's just a pretty significant number for a minimum because of PJ Tucker's career experience and what kind of minimum contract he's eligible for compared to guys with 3, 4, 5 years of experience. The Knicks can shave about $1 million off their cap table by just having a different minimum on their books, and PJ Tucker will not be essential for them. Ryan Rupert, his contract will be picked up. Minot's will be picked up. I think Minnesota still has a lot of long-term hope and investment in him, especially if they do make a 2 or 3 for 1 trade this offseason. Minot will be, I think, an 8th or 9th guy in their rotation possibly. Guy Santos played some really good minutes for Golden State this year. They'll definitely pick up his option. I think he's a really solid player. Keon Ellis is the best player on this graphic right now. Just head and shoulders better than anybody else on this list. Currently that I'm showing you on the screen, Keon Ellis, $2.2 million. That's a super friendly deal. And Sacramento will no doubt pick that option up. Jalen Wilson, again, kind of in that same conversation we had about Keon Johnson. If the Nets want $90 million in cap space, they'll cut some of these options loose. But more likely than not, they just pick them up because they're very cheap and essentially expiring. Tony Bradley, $2.9 million. Really solid performances from him in the Eastern Conference Finals. Actually, one of my favorite stories this postseason has been Tony Bradley getting some deep postseason run. Really love that. I've just had a great time. I think they'll probably keep him. He's insurance given the Myles Turner situation, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And then Elfrid Payton, $3.2 million. I'm not sure if New Orleans is going to keep that. Again, that salary is a little high for a minimum contract if you compare it to two-way players, guys who have 1-2 years of experience. So Elfrid Payton probably won't be sticking in New Orleans, but he always just seems to find his way back somewhere. So don't rule out Elfrid Payton yet at this point in time. With more team options here, Jared Butler of the Philadelphia 76ers, he'll definitely be sticking around there. BJ Boston for New Orleans had, I thought, a really solid season given kind of the expectations for him and the role he had on the team coming into the year. BJ Boston will definitely be staying in New Orleans. Tyrese Martin, again, similar situation to what we talked about in Brooklyn there with Jalen Wilson. Keon Johnson probably stays, but if the Nets want all of their money for free agency, which they could do that, then you're going to see, again, those team options declined. Dominic Barlow for Atlanta. I think with Clint Capella's unrestricted free agency looming, I do think the Hawks will look to keep Dominic Barlow at $2.3 million. I think that's a very fair deal. Keshad Johnson for Miami, $2 million, definitely will pick that up. Cleveland, Chuma Okeke, they'll pick that up at $2.5 million. Very cheap. And, of course, I think one of the big questions for Cleveland, as their salary really inflates and expands on their roster with Mobley's contract, Donovan Mitchell's number, Darius Garland, Jared Allen. That team has so much money committed. And I think for Okeke, all things considered here, the biggest thing for them is to have really cheap depth pieces. And Okeke, $2.5 million at the minimum, below the minimum even a little bit, is definitely what he's going to stick around on. Jordan Goodwin, this is another no-brainer. The Lakers will pick up that team option. I think a really solid, reliable point of attack defender for them. Quentin Post, another really no-brainer one. For Golden State, had a tremendous year for them. I thought was one of the best value picks in the second round last year. He's going to stand out in a big way going forward still for Golden State, and he's extremely cheap. J.D. Davison, $2.3 million, actually won G League MVP this past year. Had a really great season for the Maine Celtics, and I think specifically when you look at what Boston's kind of going into this next year, where they're going to be shaving salary in other ways, I think keeping J.D. Davison on this kind of deal, if they trade Drew Holiday, if they trade Kristaps Porzingis, maybe even Derek White, Boston could give some minutes to a guy like J.D. Davison in kind of a developmental project year with Jason Tatum out. So I do think Davison will be in the running to be on the Celtics next year, and I do think they'll pick up this team option. Isaac Jones, $2 million for Sacramento. I think they'll pick that option up. Again, very cheap number. And then Drew Timme for Brooklyn. I think a little different than even the Tyrese Martin situation, Jalen Wilson, Keon Johnson. I do think Drew Timme's option will be picked up. Flat $2 million. It's the cheapest of all four of those options we've talked about. Really, really cheap. Had some solid moments in his short tenure with Brooklyn. But if you watched any of the G League this past year, Drew Timme was putting on an exhibition almost every single night. Had a really, really great G League year. And I do think he's going to kind of stick around like we've seen with Luka Garza on somewhat of a regular standard NBA contract. I do think Drew Timme's here to stay in Brooklyn for a little while now. If they do want to go with the cap space route, maybe I'm wrong with that, but as of right now, I just have that kind of gut inkling and feeling that Drew Timme's going to be staying in Brooklyn past this offseason. Now let's get into some maximum unrestricted free agent contracts. Guys who are unrestricted free agents that I expect to actually hit the market and get max money or close to it. And would you look at that, it's kind of desolate. I don't see anyone becoming a max free agent this offseason who's an unrestricted free agent. Now, there are some restricted guys we'll talk about that could get some big paydays. That will come a little bit later. But as of right now, the unrestricted free agency market looks extremely desolate, especially for $25 to $35 million contracts. I think Reid's one of the examples of one of the guys who's going to get paid the most. There's just not a massive market. There's just not a lot of guys out there this offseason that are worth max contracts or close to it. So I don't have anyone actually getting that kind of payday. Now, when it comes to sizable unrestricted free agent contracts, this is where you get to players who will make more than that mid-level exception. So more than $14.105 million. And I have a few guys that I highlighted for this section in the sizable contracts. 4 of them, to be exact. Myles Turner of the Indiana Pacers, Brook Lopez of the Milwaukee Bucks, D'Angelo Russell of the Brooklyn Nets, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Myles Turner, of course, with the Pacers making a huge run to the NBA Finals this year. I am recording this before Game 6, so I don't know how the series is going to end. But, of course, Indiana's had a tremendous season for themselves nonetheless. They traded pick number 23 just a few days ago, back a year, to save a little bit of money and restore some of their long-term trade flexibility. I thought it was a genius move for Indiana, and I think that points to them wanting to keep Myles Turner as well, shaving $3.5 million off of next year's salary table to ultimately probably give that to Turner. And I think with that in mind, Myles Turner will be staying in Indiana. I think anything between $18 to $22 million a year is probably what you should expect for him to actually sign for and get this offseason. You're looking at something like 4 years, $80 million. I think that's a very good, very fair contract for both sides. Indiana, I think, would love to keep Turner around. He's been so instrumental for their long-term success and has been the longest tenured Pacer now at this point in time. He's just been perennially on the trade block, perennially in the news, and, oh, is he available? Is he this? Is he that? He's a Pacer for life, seemingly, at this point. Which I'm really happy to see, and I do think he will stay in Indiana. I do think he should stay in Indiana as well. Brook Lopez, now, he's going to get a contract bigger than what I would pay him. I would be very hesitant to give him more than the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. I'm not even sure if I would fully give him that non-taxpayer mid-level exception. Brook Lopez is just very slow-footed, but when you have a 7-footer who can block shots at the rate that Brook Lopez has over the last 2-3 years, especially if you're looking at 2-3 year sample size window here. Lopez's last contract was very ginormous, 2 years, $46 million. I think it's realistic to expect him kind of in that $15 to $16 million range, looking at something like 2 years, 30, maybe 3 years, 45. But 3 years for Brook Lopez at $15 million annually is pretty scary to me. I wouldn't do that, but I do expect him to because he's a big man who can shoot and protect the rim. D'Angelo Russell has a $28 million cap hit this offseason. I think for Brooklyn, whether they want to operate with cap space or not, the first thing you do is get off that D'Angelo Russell cap hold. Whether it's keeping him at $16 to $18 million a year, I could see him doing something like a 1+1 with a player option for a total of 2 years, $32 million, maybe 2 years, $36 million is the high end of that. Anywhere between $16 to $18 million, I think, is somewhat reasonable for D'Angelo Russell. Maybe with some of the salary cap inflation, you could see those numbers climb a little bit higher, maybe 18 to 20, $18 to $22 million. But I don't know. I just don't think D'Angelo Russell really moves the needle for long-term winning. I don't know what his market's going to look like this offseason. So I think Brooklyn pretty safely is going to be able to keep him if they want to. And then Nickeil Alexander-Walker, I think one of the most underrated free agents out in the market this offseason. This is a prototypical 3-and-D guard who can guard up and down the lineup, can really effectively guard 1 through 3. I think his point of attack skills and screen navigation tools are some of the best in the business when it comes to off-the-bench players in the NBA. This is a guy who I think is going to get more than the mid-level exception, should get anywhere between $15 to $18 million annually. I think a 3-year, $45 million contract for Nickeil, especially with the cap growing, is more than fair for his services. Shoots the ball really well, gives you a little bit of extra outside of that 3-and-D kind of archetype with his ability to handle the ball just a bit. Doesn't really play as a point guard. He isn't a true ball handler, especially against ball pressure. He's just not comfortable with it. But what I do think as he can be like a driver of the basketball against hard closeouts, or a straight line driver when gaps have already been created. That's something he did really well off of Anthony Edwards, is kind of taking advantage of the defense shifting and then driving the basketball. His ambidexterity as a passer is one of my favorite things in the league to watch. Just kind of a little fun niche micro skill that he has. And I think he will get paid pretty handsomely this offseason. I definitely think he should, because he's been a huge winning contributor for Minnesota, and I don't think they're going to be able to retain him with the way the Julius Randle, Naz Reid contracts are likely shaping up for them moving forward. Now we look at the non-tax mid-level exception players. So this is, again, the non-tax mid-level exception is maxed out at $14.105 million. Now, for every player on this graphic, the 9 of them to be specific, I don't think all of them will get the full mid-level here. One of the special things about the non-tax mid-level that you can do is split it amongst multiple players, or just split it at some number. So, for example, if you want to give a guy the non-tax mid-level, it doesn't have to be all $14.1 million of it. You could do $8 million or 9.6, right? Just some arbitrary number between 14.1 and above the minimum. And I think for the non-tax mid-level especially, these 9 guys all stand out to me as really good candidates for this. Dennis Schroeder of the Detroit Pistons, I think with how he performed, he'll get a really solid number to stay in Detroit. Ultimately, him and Malik Beasley both. I think you could see the two of these guys kind of both signing under bird rights with Detroit about $10 million annually. Looking at something like 2 years, 20 for Schroeder, maybe 2 years, 24 for Malik Beasley, something in that ballpark where they're both $10-ish million players. It would help Detroit with long-term flexibility in terms of both trades and winning. And I think Schroeder and Beasley will both stay there in Detroit. Bruce Brown of the New Orleans Pelicans, of course, coming off that huge contract he signed with Indiana a few off seasons ago. He's not going to get paid that handsomely again, but I do think his market starts around $8 million and could scale up to maybe $11 or $12 million. A very cap-friendly number, very tradable contract. Now, one thing that I do think is important to note, the use of the mid-level exception is declining. More teams are starting to look at this as a trade exception and an asset mover and an asset acquisition kind of piece in trades, rather than just a free agency mechanism, which is very important to note. And if you also look at the way contracts are scaling in the NBA, more than ever now, there's more maxes and more minimums and really nothing in between. The NBA is continuing to shift into that method, especially with the harsher cap rules now with the aprons and the new CBA. So it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. These are 9 guys who I've talked about as possible candidates to receive it, but if some of them don't, I wouldn't be overly shocked because of how stingy some teams and front offices are starting to become when it comes to saving money, and of course, understandably so. Clint Capella is a guy who definitely will not get the full mid-level, but I could see him signing for slightly more than the taxpayer mid-level, so you're looking at maybe $7 million a year, $8 million a year for Clint Capella. I think the Lakers will be the team most likely to actually sign him. Gershon Yabusele of the Philadelphia 76ers, one of the big things Philly did this last trade deadline was position themselves to get out of some of the aprons to open up the ability to actually have access to the non-tax mid-level this offseason in order to keep Gershon Yabusele. So I think with Philadelphia, the kind of moves that they made, the decisions that they made internally points to them keeping Gershon on a pretty friendly contract for a guy who, remember, just 16 months ago was playing overseas, didn't really look like he had an NBA career ahead of him. An elite Olympic run really reopened that door for him, and he's taken advantage of that, and he's about to get paid pretty solidly for a role player by Philadelphia. Chris Paul of the San Antonio Spurs, there's a lot of reports and rumors right now about teams interested. I think Dallas will show a lot of interest. I think that the Portland Trailblazers will show interest in a mentorship role, one that also allows him to get on the court and actually still play. Chris Paul is going to have a pretty strong market this offseason. San Antonio probably will not look to retain him, just given the fact that they have now Dylan Harper presumably on their roster, De'Aaron Fox they traded for, and they're still, again, investing long-term in Stephon Castle. So Chris Paul, kind of the odd man out in that backcourt in San Antonio, but he will have a pretty strong market this offseason. Ty Jerome of the Cleveland Cavaliers, he will have a solid market as well. He's an analytics darling, had a really great season from an efficiency standpoint for Cleveland. Now, the postseason kind of hurt him. I thought he could have been a big contract receiver and at worst probably a full non-tax mid-level, but then his playoff performance, especially against Indiana in the second round, just did not warrant him making this full mid-level exception. So you're probably looking at a $9 to $12 million a year player. I think he's going to do better than Peyton Pritchard's contract extension he signed with Boston a few years ago, but he's not going to be raking in the dough, so to speak, this offseason. I think he'll just do well for himself. Trey Jones, kind of on the lower end of this non-tax mid-level, $7-8 million is what I think, just a little bit more than the taxpayer mid-level. And Karis LeVert, probably 8 to 9-ish, just kind of in the midpoint between the non-tax mid-level and the minimum. And I think Atlanta will keep him as well this offseason. Now we look at the taxpayer mid-level exception and the biannual exception. For those who do not know, the taxpayer mid-level is $5.685 million, and the biannual exception is $5.135 million. Now, this is where you get into some more veteran players, some guys who are more established, maybe aging a little bit and not having that clear defined role on a bigger contract moving forward, or some young-ish guys who are just looking for more than the minimum. And it's an interesting bunch here. Al Horford for the Boston Celtics. I think he would be a really interesting name to watch this offseason with Boston kind of out for the count this year with Tatum's injury. Horford becomes one of the more unique free agent options. He's bounced around a little bit, spent some time in Philly, spent some time in OKC. He's a different player in Boston than he has been everywhere else in his career. Not sure what his market's going to look like, which teams are going to be interested, but I do think he'll get paid way more than the minimum, and I think this taxpayer or biannual number is a little bit more likely for him this offseason. Tim Hardaway Jr. Definitely will not be making the type of money he was making prior to this offseason. I think that taxpayer mid-level is definitely very similar to what Malik Beasley signed for last offseason, $5 million. That's kind of what I think Tim Hardaway Jr. is worth at this point. Chris Boucher, definitely kind of a taxpayer mid-level kind of guy as well. Has a real impact when he's on the court. I do think Toronto would like to keep him, but with how expensive their starting five is, maybe Boucher is expended at the behalf of the Raptors' short-term cap table. Gary Payton II, I think he's kind of in the middle of a minimum player and a tax mid-level guy, kind of like $3.5–4 million instead of just like a flat $3 million minimum. So I could see Golden State keeping bird rights and just deciding, hey, we're going to pay you a little bit more than the minimum to keep you around, maybe like a 2-year, $8 million deal, something like $4 million annually. Russell Westbrook, a guy who falls into this category as well. I do think Denver will keep Russell Westbrook, and I think one of the biggest advantages for Russ this past season was the fact that he was no longer defended by centers because Jokic was guarded by centers. And that's one of the huge advantages of having a post-up big man still, even in the year 2025. It allows you to play other non-shooters because if you have a dominant post-up guy, you can't really switch the matchups too effectively. And I think that's an important thing to just note about the fit between Russ and Denver. Kevon Looney for Golden State. I think this is a really fascinating one as well. One of the contracts where I think, from a legacy standpoint there in Golden State with how many good years and good minutes he's played for them, they're going to want to keep him. I just don't think that number can be too much for their own flexibility. So you're looking at $4.5–5 million a year. He's coming off a contract that was making quite a bit more than that. So is he going to be okay with that pay reduction? Will a team look to sign him for bigger this offseason? I don't really think so. I think that $5 million kind of number is pretty fair. Now, remember, with bird rights, they could go above this number. They could look at $6–7 million. But I think from a reasonable standpoint, Golden State should look and say, your market's not going to be outbid by us at $5.5 million. Jake LaRavia from Sacramento, remember, was traded there midseason from Memphis. I do think LaRavia is kind of in that lower tier of this taxpayer mid-level exception group. Like $4 million a year is probably realistic. Gary Trent Jr. played on the minimum this past year for Milwaukee. I think he's looking for a bounce back this offseason. Last offseason was a real strenuous one for him. His market just kind of evaporated and dissipated on him pretty quickly. I think Gary Trent Jr. is going to be looking to lock in a contract as quickly as possible. And if he can get a 3-year, $15 million deal, he should sign that. Malcolm Brogdon of the Washington Wizards, he'll look to go to a contender. He could definitely be a candidate to land in Houston. There's a few spots that make a lot of sense for him. Dallas will be another team really considering him. So keep your eyes on Brogdon this offseason. Gary Harris, I talked about earlier, is the guy who was unfortunately forced to have his team option decline because of some of the CBA rules. Gary Harris probably kind of in this $4 to $5 million salary range. Larry Nance Jr., I could see a team buying in on him. I do ultimately think at this point, a lot of these guys probably should be signed for the minimum if you're just trying to maximize your cap table. Like Larry Nance Jr., Trey Lyles, Precious Achiuwa, Gary Harris to me are minimum players. But when I'm actually expecting what happens, like Dario Saric last year got the mid-level, the tax mid-level. That shouldn't have happened. Could a guy like Larry Nance off of name and some of the solid minutes he's played in the postseason prior in his career. And when he is healthy, he is still a solid player, but he's just not healthy consistently enough. But I do think the Hawks will probably keep him, maybe something like 2 years, 8, maybe 3 years, 12, something in that kind of range. Trey Lyles out of Sacramento, kind of similar thing here. Sacramento probably just keeps him. Precious Achiuwa will probably stay in New York, something again along the lines of 2 years, 9, 2 years, $10 million. Luke Kennard, I'm not sure what Memphis is going to do. Of course, trading Desmond Bane opens up some opportunity for another shooter to slate in there. Kennard, of course, has been a very great shooter his entire NBA career. I think he's one of the more undervalued players in the league because even for a team like Memphis, who they went to the playoffs against OKC, couldn't shoot the ball, had no spacing. OKC just kept playing with huge nail help on all of Memphis's best players. Maybe putting Luke Kennard on the wing would have helped with that. Just saying. But, coaches don't look at it that way. I don't understand why, but maybe they should, especially when you get swept. But Luke Kennard definitely, I thought, could have helped Memphis more in the playoffs with a bigger role. Of course, does have his own limitations, which is why he's not more than a tax mid-level guy at this point. But still the guy who can help a team for sure. Jayshawn Tate, big hustle warrior, screen nav guy, defensive intensity, attention to detail player. Probably shouldn't make $5 million a year, but I do think he will at some point with some team this offseason. Minimum contracts. Now, these are, again, players who I don't expect to sign for more than the minimum. There's a wide list of names in here. Joe Ingles, Jeff Green, Amir Coffey, Corey Joseph, who, of course, got his team option declined at $3 million earlier this week. Mason Plumlee, Garrett Temple, DeAndre Jordan, Markieff Morris, Patty Mills, Alec Burks, Kyle Lowry. He'll stay in Philadelphia. Taj Gibson, Seth Curry will definitely stay in Charlotte, I would have to guess. Doug McDermott in Sacramento, and then Tristan Thompson for Cleveland. What you're noticing here, the trends, a majority of these guys are veteran players, just kind of sticking around. A lot of them, if they do stay in the league, and some of these guys will, unfortunately, be kind of shoved out. There's not going to be minutes, there's not going to be spots for every single guy as 60 new rookies get drafted. Well, 59 new rookies get drafted. Some guys get two-way contracts. Some guys get standard NBA deals. It does kick some of these veterans out the door, and some of them might go. Now, a guy who's not necessarily your long tenured NBA veteran in this list is Amir Coffey. Do think he's a solid player. Do think he'll stick with the Clippers. Just don't know if he's going to get more than the minimum. He could maybe be a sneaky biannual exception player again. 2 years 7, 2 years 8, kind of in that range. But I don't expect much more than that for Amir Coffey. Now, a few other minimum contract players I want to talk about here. Spencer Dinwiddie, I think he'll stay with Dallas. James Johnson, not sure he'll have a role in Indiana next season or not, but of course they'll view him as still a valuable mentor, veteran role on that team. Dante Exum probably won't stay in Dallas if I had to guess, but you never know. Maybe he will. Mavericks are, I think, looking at the guard spot pretty heavily, so I'm just not sure if Exum fits into the long-term planning anyway. Campaign for the Knicks, probably. I mean, if Thibodeau was still there, I'd say he's for sure staying. I don't know if he will, though. DeLon Wright, he should stay with the Knicks. I actually think he can help them if he got more minutes. Tyus Jones, not sure what he's going to do this offseason. I don't think his market's going to be that strong. I'm tired of hearing it for the last 3-4 years about how strong his market is, and then he ultimately doesn't really have that big of a market. Either ends up on a losing team like Washington, or he ends up on a losing team as a starter like Phoenix. There's really no in between. Taurean Prince, I think one of the better minimum contract players you can sign this offseason, had a really strong year as a catch-and-shoot guy for Milwaukee. Do think there's still a role in the league for him as a 15-minute-per-game player. Luke Cornett for Boston, another minimum contract player, but one that I think the Celtics will be heavily invested in keeping this offseason and could even maybe be starting games for them next year, depending on what happens with Porzingis and Horford. Monte Morris, not sure he's going to have another spot in the league or not, but as a veteran, he might stick around somewhere. Trendon Watford should stay in Brooklyn. I think he is a really solid investment for them as still a long-term development piece. Has had some really solid moments in his minutes. Thomas Bryant's been awesome for Indiana in stretches as well. Had some really great moments in the Eastern Conference Finals. You think about the closeout game against New York where he just went nuclear from three. Some solid moments in the finals as well. I do think Thomas Bryant, as, again, insurance, kind of like what we talked about with some of the other Pacers' big options, keeping Thomas Bryant long-term is not a bad idea for them, especially after trading for him this season. Damian Lee for Phoenix, don't think he's going to have a real market this offseason, to be honest with you. Jay Crowder might not play another NBA game. Jordan McLaughlin might not play another NBA game. Talen Horton-Tucker for Chicago probably will stick with the Bulls. Do you guys remember when the Lakers chose THT over Alex Caruso? What a disaster that was. Moving on here to some more minimum contract guys. Bol of the Phoenix Suns. Still think that there's some hope for him to, in the right system situation, kind of playing more as a wing than a big. Finding some success like that. Jackson Hayes will stay with the Lakers. I think that they'll value him as a depth big man. Vlatko Cancar, I think he'll stay with the Nuggets this offseason. The Spurs have a couple bigs. Charles Bassey, who I think probably will be gone, but then Sandro Mamukelashvili, a really skilled player, someone who I honestly don't think the mainstream media knows anything about, if anything, but he's solid. I do think Mamukelashvili can be, again, your kind of third and a half big man where you're not going to ever want to play him real minutes in an NBA setting for a long stretch of an 82-game season, but as a practice piece, a guy who in spot minutes here and there could definitely be serviceable for you as kind of a smart, intelligent, passing big man with some shooting talent. Delano Banton, I do think should stay in Portland. I'm not sure if he's going to get more than the mid-level, or the minimum, but I do think for Portland specifically, keeping him there is definitely solid. Jericho Sims, the Bucks should keep him. The Bucks should try and give him minutes this offseason, this next season. One of the things Milwaukee is really lacking is athleticism. They got Jericho Sims at the trade deadline and really didn't play him much. He has a huge host of flaws. He's not a good big man, but he runs and jumps really, really well. And I think putting more of those guys around Giannis Antetokounmpo could create a really fun, fast team environment. And I want the Bucks to try it, especially in a year where you don't have Damian Lillard. If Giannis is there this season and staying going forward, put some speed around him, put some athletes around him, and see how fast you can get up and down the court and what that does to your team identity as a whole. Landry Shamet, I think, should stay in New York. I thought he had a really solid role for them at times this past year. And the Knicks just badly need depth. So on a minimum, Shamet can be really valuable for them. Paul Reid of the Detroit Pistons, another minimum player, just hasn't really ever been able to build on some of the potential that a lot of others viewed him having. I think he's a solid player. I love B-Ball Paul, but just think he's a minimum contract guy. Lindy Waters, not sure if he's going to stick around or not. Was given some opportunities this year, especially in Golden State. Just never really made the most of them. He's kind of a fringe roster guy at this point. Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, another fringe roster guy, perhaps could stay with New Orleans. We'll see what happens there. Stanley Umude, not sure he's going to get another chance. Alex Len with the Lakers, probably not going to stick in the NBA. Kai Jones, I think he will find a home. Could be with the Lakers. Of course, was with the Clippers most recently before Dallas. So I think some team will give Kai Jones another chance. He's just so big and athletic. His highlight reel is special. So some team will give Kai Jones another chance this season, I think. And then Ben Simmons. I do want to talk about Simmons actually here a little bit. Out of all the minimum contract players, I still think Simmons has the most functionality compared to all of them. Like, Ben Simmons gave the Clippers some really solid minutes in the playoffs against the Denver Nuggets. I know people are going to laugh at that. People are going to pull up the box scores and say, well, 2 points and 2 rebounds and 1 assist is really valuable. I mean, if you watch the way he's able to hedge screens still, Jamal Murray wanted nothing to do with Ben Simmons. When in the 5 minutes a game that Ty Lue had Simmons on the court, Simmons guarding Jokic, and then the Jamal Murray-Jokic pick and roll was pretty much obliterated. They just had nowhere to go because Simmons would hard hedge the screen, and for the first time in his life, Jamal Murray coming off of a Jokic screen actually had to deal with ball pressure. And it scared the living daylights out of him, and I thought playing Simmons more in that series would have really helped the Clippers defensively. They just didn't do it. Of course, there's other stuff involved, the offensive end of the floor, the injury concerns. Is he actually able to play 60 games a year? Probably not. But I do think, again, under the idea that you're signing him to a minimum, this is a valuable signing for a minimum contract. This is a guy who, for the 40 games you have him and the 15 minutes a night you play him, That's 600 minutes of valuable basketball that is going to be better than a Jericho Sims. It's going to be better than an Alex Len. It's way better than a Staniel Amude. Like, there's a lot of useful minutes that you can get from Simmons, even if he's not an 82-game player ever again, even if he's never All-Star Simmons again. He's never going to be that again. I think that's okay, but on the minimum, he can bring you legitimate value. So I think a lot of teams should be looking at him as a potential minimum signing this offseason. A few more to talk about. Marvin Bagley III of the Memphis Grizzlies. I just think he's a minimum contract player at this point. Good athleticism, solid play finishing skills. Not much else to the tape other than that. Torrey Craig, obviously, has really stuck around as a veteran. Not sure he'll play again or not, but definitely could find a home. Bismack Biyombo, his career's probably done if I had to guess, but if he signs somewhere, it'll be on the minimum. Javonte Green, really solid minimum contract player. I think this is, again, one of the better minimum contract guys you can sign around the league from an 82-game standpoint because he's a high-intensity, high-effort, high-energy guy, and I think that's going to be valuable for a team. Lamar Stevens, he's bounced around quite a bit the last few years. Maybe he could stick on somewhere again. Kevin Knox, don't really think that's a minimum contract-worthy player, but he might get it off of name brand, especially. Braxton Key definitely will get one. Jalen Hood-Schifino, we'll see what happens there. Had some okay moments for Philadelphia after getting traded to Utah in the Luka Doncic trade and then waived. Hood-Schifino is definitely a useful young player for a team to at least look at, right? And give opportunity to. I could see a team like Brooklyn, Washington, giving JHS here a chance if it's not just Philadelphia holding on to him. Bones Highland starting to look like he's coming to the end of his NBA career. Maybe he lasts in Minnesota there a little bit. Of course, he's with the executive Tim Connolly, who drafted him in Denver now, so maybe he sticks for a while. And then Josh Christopher of the Miami Heat, I think will stick around, probably just staying there in Miami. Now we move on to restricted free agents. We do have 64 total restricted free agents to talk about, and we're going to start with the high-quality ones, the ones that you really want to know about. Josh Giddey. This is a player who is going to have, I think, a really intriguing market this offseason. There's been a lot of noise about some speculation and who could look at him and who's going to be in on Giddey. I think the Chicago Bulls are in a no-win battle here because, first of all, there's the sunk cost where they traded Alex Caruso to a team that might win the NBA Finals with Alex Caruso being a core contributor for them. So you're already looking at it, and I didn't love the trade myself. I gave the Thunder an A++++. It was like 6 pluses or something, and I gave the Bulls a B-. I didn't hate it for the Bulls as much as everyone else did. Josh Giddey showed why this season, had a really productive year, but this is kind of why it's a lose-lose scenario because he had a good year for them, kind of a bounce-back season in a situation where they weren't winning a lot of games like OKC was. And with the standard being a little bit lower and his production being higher, you now have to pay him. And is he going to make $30+ million a year? And that's why it's a lose-lose, because if you pay him 4 years, $120 million, I don't think that's a good contract for the Bulls. So, and I think the one issue here, too, is you have an executive over in Brooklyn named Sean Marks who has taken advantage of situations like this in the past. Remember 2016 with the cap jump? What did he do to Tyler Johnson? What did he do with Alan Crabb? Gave them huge offer sheets as restricted free agents, and ultimately hamstrung the Miami Heat and Portland Trailblazers, respectively. So could Chicago be entering a little bit of a bidding battle with Brooklyn for Josh Giddey? And do the Nets even want Josh Giddey? Probably not. They just know that Chicago's at a spot with Arturas Karnisovas not being able to lose Giddey for nothing after trading away Caruso and getting 0 draft picks. So it's a real loss situation here for Chicago. And I think ultimately Giddey's going to sign for something like 4 years, $120 million, which is a lot of money for a guy who 12 months ago we saw in the playoffs kind of completely shrink and become unplayable for Oklahoma City. Now, I do think Giddey can still be a solid player. I think that he can have real impact in winning in a different role than he was playing for in OKC. But with all of that said, he's still not a $30 million a year player, in my opinion. Jonathan Kuminga, this is another guy who's going to get a lot of money that's not worth a lot of money. If you look at Golden State, you wonder, well, Steve Kerr is ruining his development. Steve Kerr this, Steve Kerr that. Steve Kerr was playing the guys who was helping him win games. Do you notice that, like Kuminga had some really good moments when Steph Curry was out. The Warriors were not better in the games, though, without Curry and with Kuminga scoring. Keep that in mind. And there's a reason why Kuminga's scoring shouldn't be valued as this, a $35 million a year player. Honestly, his market should be about $20 to $25 million this offseason. I do think it will be more than that. One situation I really love here for Golden State is if they can facilitate a sign and trade with Chicago and get Nikola Vucevic and Lonzo Ball for him. Just straight up. Kuminga for those two guys. The Warriors get way better, the Bulls get way worse, and Kuminga gets to a spot where he can live up to his potential. Again, it's fake potential. I mean, cool, even if he averages 20 to 25 points a game and the Bulls win 28 games next year, I mean, is that a great player? I don't know. It's up to you. Your perspective is valued, so let me know in the comments what you think below. Cam Thomas for the Brooklyn Nets is another guy who can really fill it up. Actually maintains pretty solid efficiency, and I do think for Brooklyn, they kind of lucked out with him getting injured this past year because it, first of all, helped them lose a little bit. I do think they would have been slightly better with Cam Thomas playing a ton of games, and I think it kind of hamstrung his market a little bit too. Restricted free agents typically don't have big markets. The only team with real cap space that's going to be significantly usable this offseason is Brooklyn, so they don't really have to bid against anybody. Otherwise, they'd have to help out in a sign and trade, which maybe they'd be open to that anyway for Cam Thomas. But I think they're going to be able to get him $20 to $24 million a year, 4 years 80, maybe 5 years 100, somewhere in that ballpark. And I think that's definitely fair for Cam Thomas's skill set. Santi Aldama, really good free agent. I think will ultimately stay in Memphis, especially after the Desmond Bane trade. The Grizzlies have some long-term financial flexibility now. And Santi Aldama, I think, will be one of their top priorities to keep this offseason. Quentin Grimes for Philadelphia, I think people are going to be surprised for how little he signs for. I think somewhere around $8 to $12 million annually is going to be the market for Quentin Grimes. It's going to shock some people. Dallas tried to get out ahead of it by trading his contract for Caleb Martin's, and I wouldn't be shocked if Quentin Grimes is making almost the same amount of money as Caleb Martin, because the market for restricted free agency is typically restricted and kind of limited anyway. And then Grimes, I think with how teams are going to view him, even though he had such a hot end of the year in March and April basketball, which you shouldn't even put too much weight into anyway, but had some really awesome moments. The reality is on a winning team, a team that's looking to compete at a high level, Quentin Grimes is not a $25 million a year player, and he's not a 25 point per game scorer either for a good team. So keep that in mind. Day'Ron Sharpe for the Brooklyn Nets. I think this is a really solid player, someone who Brooklyn's going to have no problem keeping, and I think they'll probably get him on a pretty team-friendly number. This is a really, really important player for the Nets moving forward, I think. And this is a guy that they're going to be able to keep because I don't think the market's going to be as hot as it should be for him. Davion Mitchell, he'll stay in Miami. I really like the fact that they got him in the Jimmy Butler trade. I do think he's an underrated piece in the NBA as well. And I think he'll sign for a very team-friendly number. Trey Mann, of course, got injured, missed so much time last year after a hot start for Charlotte. He'll probably stay with the Hornets, I'd have to guess. Isaiah Jackson missed pretty much the entire season with an Achilles tear. He's a guy who Indiana might not keep, but some team should jump all over this. I'm saying like $4 to $6 million contract, something that just makes Indiana go, ooh, I don't know if we can keep that. That's a little much for what we were going to offer him. I think Indiana's looking at Isaiah Jackson, hoping maybe we keep him for around the minimum. Didn't get to play, out with an injury. He's an athletic big. Can we save money long term? If I was a team, I'd be trying to prance on this and pounce on it and jump at this opportunity and try and get a really solid shot blocker, a good rim runner, someone who gets up and down the court well, and hope that with everything going on with his rehab and recovery from a very significant injury, that he comes back about 95% of the player he was before and can give you really solid minutes. I think, again, with Indiana's center situation, Thomas Bryant, you're looking at, of course, Myles Turner's situation. Are the Pacers going to be able to pay all of these guys? And if Isaiah Jackson gets an offer sheet for $5 million a year, they might just have to look at that and say, ooh, that's a little bit more than what we want to actually do. And you might get a really solid backup big who can run and jump and block shots for really affordable. This is a player the Lakers should really be looking at this offseason to put it with Luka Doncic. Tristan Vucevic for Washington, he'll stay with the Wizards. I think he's a solid, young, restricted free agent. Of course, there's differences in caliber between a Josh Giddey, Kuminga, and Vucevic and Isaiah Jackson, right? Like, these are not all the same tier of restricted free agents, but they are some of the more notable ones. And then we have some other restricted free agents who maybe aren't nearly as notable, but still have maybe a career ahead of them in Antonio Reeves, JT Thor, Zaire Williams, Jabari Walker, Jeff Doughton, Markelle Fultz, interestingly enough, is a RFA again. Marjon Beauchamp, Ryan Rollins, who I thought stood out pretty big time this year for Milwaukee. Pat Spencer had, I think, a pretty solid stretch of moments this year for Golden State when he actually got on the court. David Roddy, not sure if Houston's actually going to keep him or not. And then Brandon Carlson had some awesome moments for OKC. I do think they'll keep him long term. For the most part, a majority of these guys I do think will stay with their current team. I think Beauchamp will stay in New York. I think Reeves will stay in New Orleans for sure. I think Jabari Walker will for sure stay in Portland. Pat Spencer, Rollins, they'll both stay in their current situations. And if they don't stay in their current situation, they might not have a real NBA home going into next season. These are two-way contract restricted free agents. Now, this is, again, for the real basketball sickos. Earlier, I had you comment basketball sicko. If you are one, this is like die-hard mode. So what I want you to do right now, if you made it to this part of the video and you're planning on sticking around for the two-way contract restricted free agents, you need to comment die-hard down below. Everyone else who didn't get to this point won't understand what you're saying, but man, you're a diehard if you are sticking around for these two-way contract RFAs. Jacob Toppin, of course, the brother of Obi Toppin, I do think probable chance he stays in Atlanta, especially with kind of the movement there in the front court for them. Maybe keeping him around, giving him an opportunity to continue growing. Same with Keaton Wallace. Actually had some really awesome moments this year for Atlanta. Keaton Wallace is a really good player for a restricted free agent two-way guy. Like, this is a guy that Atlanta should definitely be looking to keep. Reese Beekman, not really sure if the offense is ever going to get to a point where he warrants real NBA minutes. Not sure he's going to be a core piece for Brooklyn moving forward. Drew Peterson for Boston did actually get some good playtime this year and had some solid moments. I think the Celtics will actually look to keep him. Wendell Moore Jr., I just don't see it. I don't think he's an NBA caliber player. He's just one of those guys who's pretty solid at a lot of things, not really good at anything, and I'm just not sure he's ever going to really carve out a career. I do think the Bulls should keep EJ Liddell. I liked him a lot in his draft. Of course, he's gone through and dealt with a ton of injury stuff since, unfortunately, but he was a beast at Ohio State, and I think Chicago should definitely look to keep him. Emmanuel Miller, I mean, if he stays, he stays. That wouldn't be a bad option for Chicago. Amani Bates, the Cavs will definitely hold on to. I do think there's a little bit of investment there long-term, especially as they kind of go through a cap crunch here. If they give up Max Strus, having a really cheap movement shooter isn't the worst thing. Now, I'm not sure if Amani Bates is ever really going to carve out that actual legitimate role for Cleveland, but I would like to see him stick there with the Cavs, at least moving forward. Kessler Edwards for the Dallas Mavericks. I do think he'll stay. He played a lot of minutes this last year for Dallas as they were going through injury issues. Kessler Edwards, I do think he's, again, not a guy who's very good at anything, but he's a high energy intensity guy, and I think Dallas will at least value that on the margins of their roster. Denver's got three guys here to talk about: Spencer Jones, Trey Alexander, PJ Hall. I think Trey Alexander and PJ Hall especially will stay in Denver for sure. But one thing about Denver in general, they're getting Day'Ron Holmes II back next year off of his injury. Spencer Jones might be out of a job here with Denver. I'm not sure if they're going to keep him. But Trey Alexander, I definitely think there's a little bit of investment there. And PJ Hall, I do think, again, for a guy who they took out of Clemson and looked at his development long-term with, I think they're going to hopefully stick with him there, whether it's on a two-way contract or not. Dennis Jenkins from Detroit, honestly, I don't know what Detroit's going to do. I think, like, a lot of these two-way guys, like, a lot of them are going to be kind of cycled through. It's opportunities for teams to get guys in the door, get them into workouts, get them into practices, see them in the G League, and there's not a lot of staying power in this kind of contract role. You either excel over it and then get a standard contract. You very typically don't stay in a two-way contract for years and years and years with one team, so keep that in mind. Teron Armstrong here for Golden State. Again, probable some movement there. And Folly Dante for Houston, Jack McVay for Houston. I do think Dante could stick there. Not sure about McVay. He is an older two-way guy. I believe he's 28 years old, so not sure if that's going to be part of Houston's MO moving forward. Quentin Jackson for Indiana. Not really sure that's going to be a huge sticking point for them. One of the things I am bummed about for them is that they let Tristan Newton go last season. I thought they should have held on to that type of player on the two-way contract, but we'll talk about him in just a couple minutes. Trenton Flowers for the LA Clippers. This is a guy that they definitely need to keep around. He's really fun, good young athlete. And I think if the skills continue developing in some of the dribble, pass, shoot areas, he could definitely stick around in the NBA for a while because he's so athletic for a bigger guard. I definitely think there's some value there as kind of a combo wing. Christian Koloko, I do think the Lakers will probably keep him, just looking for big man depth in general, and hopefully Koloko, who's dealt with some major health stuff in his early career, hopefully he can start to put a couple good days together back to back to really build up his career again. Yuki Kawamura for Memphis, I do think has kind of found a home there. Of course, you do have a head coaching change, though. Taylor Jenkins obviously out of that job at the end of the season, so these two-way guys are kind of liable to change sometimes because of that. But Cam Spencer is definitely safe. This is one of the best two-way contract players in the league. Really, really legitimate. Had a huge role for UConn, of course, in a national championship run. Cam Spencer's really good. He can shoot the ball. This is a guy who, if the NBA was slightly worse, would have an actual legitimate role on the team. There's just so many good players right now. It's hard for even a guy as good as Cam Spencer is to really break in. Isaiah Stevens from Miami very likely could stay. Drew Smith will probably definitely stay in Miami moving forward. And then a few more to talk about. Tristan Newton, there he is. I said we were going to talk about him. Minnesota will look to keep him for sure. I think they were very excited internally when they were able to get him on that two-way contract after Indiana let him go. Jesse Edwards was one of the big risers in the end of the cycle last year for the draft because of a lot of the physical tools and some of the excitement over his productivity in college. Minnesota very likely could keep him as well as a big man, especially amidst some of the Gobert trade rumors. Keon Brooks, not sure he's going to stick in New Orleans. Jamal Cain, I do think will stick with the Pelicans, though. Kevin McCullough Jr., again, former Kansas Jayhawk. This is a guy I think the Knicks will actually keep. He's another player who, coming into his draft, I kind of compared him a little bit to that Wendell Moore Jr. Player where he's good at a lot of things, but not very good at a lot of things, where I'm not sure what his NBA future really looks like. But as a depth piece right now for a team that's really thin, I think the Knicks will keep him. And Anton Watson, of course. Watson was so good for Gonzaga for a while. I do think that they'll ultimately keep him in the building in some way, shape, or form. OKC, with all of their draft picks this year, some of their young guys under contract, I don't think Adam Flagler or Alex Dukas will be back on two ways for them next year. Flagler had some of the worst moments and worst games this season, too, from an efficiency standpoint. If you know, you know. Mac McClung, best dunker in NBA history. I'm not going to say what I was about to say. But Mac McClung, man, I do think he'll probably stay with Orlando's G League team. He'll probably stay in a two-way with them because I think they love all the exposure in All-Star Weekend. And then some Suns guys here. Ty Washington, I think, will stay in Phoenix. Colin Gillespie will definitely stay in Phoenix. Probably will get a standard NBA contract because he started a bunch of games for the Suns last year as a two-way guy, which is crazy. So he's definitely going to be sticking in Phoenix. And then Jalen Bridges, another guy who I just think will stick in Phoenix. I think all the young guys will stay for the Suns in general. And a few more to cap us off here for the two-way restricted free agents. Again, I hope you guys are enjoying. You guys are, again, huge diehards, so thank you so much for sticking through. Justin Minaya could stay with Portland. I thought Bryce McGowan was a really sneaky pickup for Portland. Of course, was a former either a high second or late first, I think high second round pick for Charlotte out of Nebraska. Bryce McGowan's one of the guys that I evaluated very closely in his draft class. Had some real functional issues, which is why he's bounced around from where he was drafted in Charlotte. But I thought for Portland specifically, if you're looking at Rip City Remix and the way that G League operates, like having a kind of scorer like this in the G League can actually be a really useful tool for development of other play types around him. Like if you ever have a point guard you want to develop in the G League or a screen setting big who can roll, like having a Bryce McGowan, this is something that, like this is a little meta analysis here, but like having good players in your G League who can do certain things like score, handle the basketball, pass, screen, rebound, like an Oscar Tshiebwe for an example, like there's so much value in that because I think it sets up a good developmental environment for other players when you send them to the G League and give them opportunities to play there. I think Bryce McGowan was a really sneaky get. I hope Portland keeps him long-term. Mason Jones for Sacramento, I think he'll stay probably with the Kings, as will Isaiah Crawford. I really liked him last draft. I think he could definitely carve out an NBA career, and I think for the Kings specifically, they will hold on to him. Harrison Ingram, not sure if he's going to stick with the Spurs. David Duke, really talented player. David Duke's actually got one of the better crossovers in the entire world. I know that's going to sound kind of outlandish to say, but I really truly mean it. I love David Duke's crossover. I think his handle's really, really solid and deceptive, and he's got some good functional athletic tools. It's just a little bit of that point guard tax I've talked about in recent videos where he's good. He's just not good enough to supersede a Dylan Harper or a De'Aaron Fox or a Stephon Castle. And as a result of that, he's just kind of stuck as a two-way guy, unfortunately. Riley Minix probably will stay as a two-way guy. Not sure if he'll be with the Spurs or not. And then Micah Potter, another guy for Utah. He's been really productive when he's had opportunities and has dominated the G League at times. I think he'll probably stick with the Jazz, but Austin Ainge, new president coming in. It's hard to exactly imagine how Utah is going to operate just because you have a new head honcho there. Things change, but Micah Potter definitely has some possible staying power there in Utah, and if not, he'll definitely catch on a two-way contract with another team this offseason. Thank you all so much for watching. Really hope you guys did enjoy. That was a deep dive jump into 198 NBA free agents this offseason. Again, a lot of work goes into these videos, as you all know. Thank you so much for staying tuned all throughout this video. Again, shout out to all the diehards. Shout out to all the basketball sickos out there. I really do appreciate you guys. And we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.